Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and today we're going to have some real talk, because most of us want the full Warhammer Fantasy experience when it comes to Total War Warhammer 3. The fan-made map that we can see on screen right now is literally what most people want, or at least that's what I want and I know a lot of others. Give or take the Chaos Realms, but the main thing is people want a playable Ind, a playable Khuresh, a possible Nippon, among a few other races and factions that, well, they didn't really have army books, but they could potentially have some in the future. Now, we know for certain that Creative Assembly have 3 to 4 years planned for continued support for Warhammer 3 before, I guess, moving on to the next title, likely Total War Warhammer 40k. And before anyone says that's not going to work and so on, we're not talking about 40k today, so let's move on. Now, it's entirely possible we could see a race like Ind and Khuresh within those 3 to 4 years. I believe what happened with Warhammer 2 is we were getting a race pack once every year and a half, until it stopped, obviously, as we only had 2 races for Warhammer 2. But it could work in the very same way. Here, we've already got 1 race. Within the 4-year mark, it is entirely possible to see Ind and or Khuresh between that point of time, but it doesn't feel like there is enough time, at least for anything else, if Ind and Khuresh are in the equation. I mean, we already know that Ind and Khuresh are going to open up eventually. It's probably not going to be a playable race, at least for the very beginning. It's going to be used for minor factions. This is something that we've known since Immortal Empires was announced, I believe, which, you know, works well. It'll at least give Nakai the Wanderer some reason to go down south, for example. You can stick some other characters in there, but having, say, for example, Empire and Cafe clones there, that's going to be an absolute disappointment. It's the same feeling I get when I look at the Southern Realms, for example, Estalia, Talia, those areas which use Empire clones, when in reality, you know, they should be their own factions. Yes, they never had army books, but we'll get to that a little bit later on in this video. Now, I imagine that the 3 to 4 year timeline is probably because that's when the license runs out. I'm not 100% too sure here, considering that there have been cases of older Total War titles like Rome 2, which got DLC really far off from its actual development cycle. This was actually because Creative Assembly had acquired CA Sophia and they wanted to test them out to see how they could make a Total War title, so they made them do a Rome 2 DLC, which kind of makes sense, to be honest. Throw them into a title which you don't really care about too much at this point, because you're working on other stuff, but you'll want to see how it will work and if it would actually sell. Regarding the license, it's not out of the question for Games Workshop to extend it should Creative Assembly ask for it, or Games Workshop themselves might even suggest it, considering that Total War Warhammer has been so far one of the, if not the largest and possibly most profitable Warhammer-based video game. Not only is this title bringing them cash, but it's also promoting their products. There are a lot of people who I've been talking to who wanted to get into Warhammer Fantasy, have been buying them Warhammer Fantasy miniatures. Obviously, Warhammer Fantasy isn't here right now, and we're getting Warhammer the Old World potentially this year if the rumors are correct. But those who have gotten into the Warhammer bug already started learning about the other franchises like 40k and Age of Sigmar and have gotten into those too. There is promotion to be done with a large Total War style game. With regards to Creative Assembly, this is a very active and popular title for them. It looks good when talking to Sega. I'm imagining about projections and so on. And yeah, even with 3.1, which, let's be honest, this patch has been fairly awful, they're still averaging around 20k players a day, which is comparable to the end of the lifespan of Total War Warhammer 2. I mean, not being funny, but there's many other grand strategy games, or even just strategy games, that have released around this time during the period of the Warhammer franchise for Total War, and not long after launch, their player base has gone down. Total War has always kind of dominated here. There's lots of ups and downs, but Total War Warhammer has proven to stay on the up as much as possible, with historically going down to the lowest when, well, you know, it was just Realm of Chaos and, well, that map was just awful. Let me be clear, it's not really the map itself, it was more the really bad storyline of the whole Demon Souls and player inserts and, yeah. Now, you might be saying that Ind, Nippon, Khuresh, and so on don't have army books, which is actually a fair thing to point out. They never had army books. Nippon did have some units back in the day, but really there's not really that much to be able to base an army book over. You see, when we look at Kislev, the Vampire Coast, and Norska, Well, the thing is, they were special cases. Kislev had a supplement in 6th edition, even though Kislev is very radically different now than what we've seen. So there's something to talk about in Kislev later on in the video. The Vampire Coast never had an army book, and that was just a supplement again in 6th edition, again, why 6th edition was so good. And Norska, well, Norska just takes stuff that wasn't used from the Warriors of Chaos. That's essentially it. A lot of stuff from supplements, like, you know, when the Famir got introduced, the Chaos War Mammoth and all that. But even then, that's literally just Warriors of Chaos stuff, just shoehorned into its own thing. Which is a bit of a shame, by the way. Cafe did have some units, but again, not enough to base an army book. And both Kislev and Cafe, we are aware, were a joint effort between Creative Assembly and Games Workshop because, well, surprise, surprise, Cafe and Kislev are coming to Warhammer the Old World. Sadly, both Cafe and Kislev won't be available at launch of Warhammer the Old World. This was confirmed by members of staff at Warhammer Fest, where they'll come later down the line, possibly Wave 2 and Wave 3. But their cooperation works as perfect cross-marketing. While you might not be 100% interested in buying a full army and playing Warhammer the Old World, you might want to buy a few miniatures because you might want a bear rider, for example, on your desk or something. A lot of people do that because they like just painting the miniatures and having a little nice knickknack on their table, basically. Obviously, we have no idea if Games Workshop have plans for Ind, Khuresh, Nippon, and every other race in the future, as Games Workshop are very secretive about these things. However, we can more or less assume that the foundations are being set. One thing to note is that Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay by Cubicle 7, which, by the way, anytime they do a lore update, that needs to be approved by GW. In fact, there is a lot of ex-GW staff that work within Cubicle 7. They are very much together. Hell, the Lector board game is also available through Games Workshop proper now. Put it this way, when I had to do my interview for the Cubicle 7 thing, where we discussed a bunch of lore stuff and confirmed a bunch of lore stuff, all those questions had to be sent to Games Workshop to actually get approved. Some stuff was unfortunately not allowed to be answered and so on, but yeah, you know, these things do happen. But we've also seen lore updates there where, for example, there was a minor one with Ind, where we know they have a ship called the Dow, which is, funny enough, something taken from real world India. Then we obviously know that the Dreadmore is part of Khuresh, but also might be part of Chaos at the same time. There's a lot of different updates there. We know that the gods of lore are back and they're primarily worshipped in Talia. There's been a lot of lore updates for Estalia, Talia, and so on, which have, funny enough, been getting little hints in Warhammer the Old World when they started showing off the Border Prince territories, and there were some very interesting but unique looking heraldries that kind of fit with the whole Talia, Estalia, and Araby theme, with their own specific naming conventions, which also had that type of theme too. And the problem is that Games Workshop upload this in potato quality onto their website, which, yeah, not great. So that was all the context that we needed to have for this video, because there are a lot of factors. Obviously, it's Creative Assembly if they want to do this, if they have the time, Games Workshop if they want to do this, and obviously if Games Workshop and Creative Assembly want to obviously collaborate again to create a new race and faction. So I'd say there's a few factors that would have to come into play that would determine if we'll get these unique races in the future or not. First up, obviously Total War Warhammer is going to have to remain popular. People are going to have to keep on playing, but also keep active in the forums, requesting those DLCs in a very polite way, of course. Don't put demands, just like, you know, it would be nice if we had this. Keep reminding them that these locations still exist, because Creative Assembly have said time and time again that, yeah, you know, they are listening. Hopefully this means that they are actually listening and not just doing the usual thing that most companies and, well, people do, which, yeah, I'm listening to you, and they're just doing their own thing. Games Workshop would need to be reminded too, as, well, you know, this is a thing with Games Workshop. They do listen, and it's a weird thing. It took a long time, but we finally got the squats back. Yes, they're known as Leagues of Votan, but that's a perfect example of people wanting and finally getting it. Same thing with the Sisters of Battle, you know. They were metal for a long time, but they finally got remade to be plastic. That was because of fan outcry. Because, believe me, if Games Workshop could just keep selling you those metal models at a premium and increasing the prices on them, they would. Old World would need to see some level of success. I imagine that they're not going to put dev time into the creation of lore for, you know, Ind, Khuresh, Nippon, or whatever, if there was no intention of them profiting more than expected. At the end of the day, yes, Total War DLC would get them some level of profit, but the amount of dev time that would be needed to craft not only just units, but about a few thousand years worth of lore to make sense in the setting, that would be a lot of dev time taken away from potential other stuff, you know? I would be stupidly surprised if we got an Ind DLC but we didn't get an Ind army. And I think the biggest factor for the old world stuff and even just potential DLC is going to be time. If Old World is going to be the deciding factor about other things, well, we're not going to be seeing Cafe and Kislev for a while. I imagine that Cafe is going to be Wave 3, with Kislev being Wave 2. Right now, Wave 1 is just 9 factions. And these waves could take a while, you know? This could take 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. It depends on how popular Old World is to see if there's going to be profit there. The main thing is 3 to 4 years is not enough for Total War Warhammer, I'd say, if they have the potential of doing these factions. But everything is linked in terms of Games Workshop, Old World, Creative Assembly, Total War. It's gonna be weird. I want to keep positively optimistic because I do want these races and factions. I think it's really, really important that we should see them and see the Warhammer world fully fleshed out. But the fan base needs to keep vocal about it, respectfully of course. Don't start insulting the devs because that's not going to get us anywhere. But yeah, asking both Games Workshop or reminding Games Workshop and Creative Assembly that these nations still exist in lore might be an important thing. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let's start a bit of discussion. I'm sorry that this video is horrendously late. This heat wave has, yeah, it's been pretty fun down here in Gibraltar, where, yeah, it's just humid heat. It's not great. But I'll see you all again very, very soon. Have a great day, guys.